Right, morning everyone. So as you said, I'm the ranger here. I'll explain a little bit about what I do and what the farm does as we walk up. I'm very much going to focus my walk and talk on what we're currently doing, what we're hoping to do in the future, and how that ties back into some of the history of the farm and what that is trying to reproduce. So that's essentially what I'm going to do for the first little bit. I think it's always nice for us to take a little walk up to the track. We'll have a look at our hedges and our woodland, and we'll explain what we're going to do. So the big message from Woodoaks Farm here is to connect people to food farming and nature. So farms can feel very unwelcoming a lot of the time, you know, big industrial machinery, people who are very, very busy. It's a very tough lifestyle for the farmers. Understandably, when people are trying to come on and off their land, it can feel a little bit like a conflict between them and the public. What we want to do is educate people on how we can produce food in a nature-friendly way on the farm, but have people at the heart of that as well. So when Sally Finley, who is still living in the farmhouse, kindly donated about 3 or 4 years ago the farm to the Soil Association, those were her aims that tied in nicely with the Soil Association's aims as well. So that is how Woodokes has ended up with the Soil Association, and my role is to work with volunteers, do some of the fringes and the edges. I'm not one of the farmers here. We have tenanted farmers, the Whitbees. They do the broad landscape, so they look after our organic beef, our arable land, but we work very closely with them, to achieve what needs to be achieved on the farm. So we've got an organic beef herd at the moment, and a lot of our land is in herbal ley currently. So these 2 fields out here that you can see just to the left, they've got a lucerne planted in them at the moment. So they're cut for hay and silage. They feed our cattle over the winter, but what that's doing is building that soil fertility. So we're trying to put in all those nutrients using the plants rather than artificial inputs. So that's what they're currently doing, and then eventually they'll be put into cereal crop rotation. That's still being agreed and tweaked as to what that rotation will be, but the idea of the kind of agroforestry and the way that the farm wants to operate is that you will never have to put inputs back into the land. Whatever your rotation is, you're always putting back in the nutrients from last year's crop, and that way you've got that nice cycle. And if we do ever have to leave a field fallow, so we don't plant anything for the year, we can plant up a herbal ley and put our cattle in there to graze as well, so they get some really nice sort of nutrient in that. So yeah, currently just the organic beef. We were certified organic 2 weeks ago, so that's taken 3 years, which is a wonderful achievement. I can't take any credit for that, I've not been here long enough to. But the farmers have done a great job, and our cattle are in conversion, so their calves being born onto organic land, they will now be fully certified organic beef, which is a wonderful achievement. Cool. If you want to follow me and head out, like I say, just fire any questions away. We're going to go out here and right, and we'll talk a little bit about what we do on the farm.
We need to explain when they are.
And one that was planted, I think, 2 or 3 years ago now, by our volunteers and by big community days, and support with things like the Chiltern Rangers, who are another conservation group that support local wildlife recovery. And you can see here that it's doing a wonderful job in some of the patches. So here we've got a lot of the dogwood that's coming up through and suckering. We've got some hawthorn on the left, really doing a good job. Now the reason we've had to replant these is over the last 70 to 100 years in farming, hedgerows became a bit of a pain. They wanted bigger fields, they can get their tractors through easier, it reduces the amount of time, the amount of fuel that they need to use to move around the farm, and so it was seen as an inconvenience. So hedges were removed, fields were made bigger and bigger and bigger, one crop was planted because again it becomes a lot easier to manage at that point. But with that comes wildlife decline. We know that hedges are so important for a range of species, birds, small mammals, the fruits that they provide, the fruits and the berries that they provide over winter are absolutely vital for some that stay over winter. So in our journey to return to what farms would have looked like 100 years ago, we've started to plant hedges. So this one in front of us is starting to bust up lovely, looking really good. We've got the hedgerow through the middle of these 2 fields. We've got a hedgerow at the end of the other field. We've got hedgerows all the way down the tracks. But you can imagine that there is a little bit of a problem when it comes to planting so many hedgerows. And can anyone kind of have a guess at what that is? So cost is one of them. So we get grant funding again. So coming back to the question earlier, we get some support and some funding for hedges and to have them fenced. Any other problems?
Time.
Labour, yeah, absolutely. So at my old jobs that weren't an organic farm, to plant a hedgerow, we would cut the vegetation, we would rotivate, we would spray it so no weeds came through, and then we would plant the hedgerow. Problem we have here is we can't spray. We don't want to spray. We don't want those inputs into the ground. So the next stage is, how do we keep the weeds from suppressing the hedgerows, which you can see in here is not too bad, but hawthorn and dogwood are very good at dealing with scrub. They're a pioneer species, they get onto the grasslands. But as we go a little bit further up, you can see that the hedgerow's just been engulfed by the vegetation. So we have to use a huge amount of volunteer hours to try and manage these hedges. So where we were a few years ago, and we've planted I think maybe even nearly 3 kilometres worth of hedgerows, we need to manage them now. These are now looking at the point where in the next probably few weeks, I wouldn't mind coming along with my hedge trimmer and just taking the tops off of these hedges and allowing the growth to come through the base and make it nice and big and thick, which is great for that wildlife recovery. And then, as you say, probably in 7 to 10 years, as they get a little bit thicker, we can look to lay them. If you don't lay your hedges, and we'll see some of the evidence as we go up to the left, you can end up with quite a big gap at the bottom, because where they're trying to shoot up and gain that light and compete for those nutrients, they won't worry about building branches at the bottom. They'll just go up and up and up to beat all of this vegetation. If you're a small mammal, you're trying to avoid foxes and owls and all of those things that are hunting you. Having a big gap that you're trying to run through the hedge is not ideal. So by laying the hedge, what we mean is we cut about 80% of the hedge. You can use bill hooks, very, very sharp knives. Some people will use like a machete, whatever you want to use. You can use a chainsaw if it's big enough, but you take strips down the back until you get to the point where you can bend the hedge over. A conservation style would be just weave it all together and then allow that to bust up. So you keep the plant alive, but you encourage it to grow out from the base and then back up again, and you get these lovely thick hedges. So as you can imagine, our volunteers are absolutely vital to the success of these plants, because we need to get in there and manage them. Not so bad when they get to this size, but when they start about this size, it can be quite difficult. We'll talk a little bit about our woodland management. Up there, and then all gone through. There's a really nice bit of woodland that gets uneven through here, especially when it's been raining quite heavily. I call this my soapbox. I use it on nearly every garden tour. It's an excellent place to be. I used to be a teacher and a sports coach, so sometimes. But this is the uphill bit done, so we'll head back down so that our timings work out. So that was the hard part of the walk sorted. And to be honest, this is probably the hardest bit of the whole farm. So if you do ever get a chance to come and visit and have a walk, once you get past here, it's lovely and flat all the way around. There's a nice walk that brings you back down the track. So get into this question. So behind me, I have a good bit of woodland or a bad bit of woodland. Who wants to tell me?
Depends what you're doing with it.
So quite dense. Yeah, it's a good question. The reason I always like that question is because this little pocket of woodland here is natural colonisation. So it is the woodland creeping out into an area and taking space. That is what woodlands love to do. So if they're next to a grassland or an arable field, they will creep out and creep out and creep out. You'll get your hazels, your hawthorns, your dogwoods, a lot of ash will come out. They're really pioneer species. They'll get into the grasslands and they'll start to grow up. The problem with not managing the woodlands at the moment would be which of these trees are going to be successful and which ones are going to become big veteran trees, which ones are going to support large wildlife. So those are the kind of things that we need to look at. So you pointed at the oaks. Yeah, so our oaks here, absolutely fantastic. But does anyone know where you get your best oaks? Where you see your big 400, 500 years grow all the way to be veterans and die?
Where is the location?
As in location on a farm or in general. Would they be in a woodland?
Only in the middle of the field, isn't it?
Usually in the middle of a field.
In the middle of the field,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the reason being is that they've got space to grow. Oaks do not want to be too close together, and each species will have a bit of a tolerance about that. How close do they want other species, how close do they want the same species to be growing? So within our woodland management, we probably do have to come in here and do a bit of thinning and try and open the ground up to let that light in. looking for bluebells, looking for that ground flora to come through. But at the same time, we can actually start to select some trees that might have a chance of becoming nice big veterans. What often gets asked is, why can't we just leave it alone? Why can't we just leave the woodland alone? They used to already, manage themselves. Does anyone know why we can't just leave it alone?
Danger about ones falling down on people.
So safety is important, yeah. So we have a legal obligation to look after people on the farm, so we have to fell anything that is a safety risk. With ash dieback, so many trees are failing, and at the crown as well, so before you even see the failure, they're dying and dropping off, so we have to make sure we're really stringent with that. Yeah, absolutely, changes in climate. What would happen if I just let all of these trees grow up, or we have let them grow up from the ground? We spoke about it with the hedges.
Too much competition, right?
They might be quite selective, so we might end up with just one species of tree all coming through, and we don't have any of that structural diversity as well, so we can't just leave those. Also, we have a lack of veteran trees. There aren't any big trees anymore, and what used to happen is big tree would die, fall over. What does that do? Knocks everything else out in its path. Light opens up in the woodland. That won't happen. We don't have veteran trees, so we have to mimic those processes in the hope that we can get to a point where it will then self-sustain. I think rewilding gets talked about a lot, and wilding. I think it's an absolutely wonderful idea, but there is a way of getting to that point, and we have to understand the processes and the management of us supporting the woodlands, because only about 2% of the woodlands in the UK have ever been left alone. Everything else has been managed at some point. So if we, as we walk next, have a look through the gates against our work, we've got our wildflower strips there.